This is Remote Daily, your daily dose of inspiration.
This is a Remote Daily for one of the very, very special episodes, our season finale, where we don't have just one host. We have three of them. Eleanor and Liz are joining me on stage, which I am very excited about. On our agenda today, how it is to live and work in one of the most diverse places on Earth, and how to build the future of the arts world, sustainable arts, post-pandemic arts. Our guest is currently a New Yorker in the Emirates, where he is the executive artistic director of the Art Center at York University Abu Dhabi. That's a long title for an amazing place that he's created as a true change maker. And he's co-founded globalFEST, which is happening tomorrow. That's also why he's in the city right now. And to me, he's really the OG for a lot what keeps arts together. Welcome, Bill Bragin. So good to have you, Bill.
Great. Well, thank you for that kind introduction. I'm like many people fighting against the COVID. It finally caught up with me, but luckily it's not been too bad, and I'm at the tail end of it. So this is all good.
Oh man, are you going to be able to attend your own festival, globalFEST, tomorrow?
That is the race against the clock right now. Indeed.
Woo! The first question is actually Eleanor's. Eleanor, what would you like to know from Bill?
You are one of the most respected and influential figures in the performing arts community. And I can say personally that I've had a lot of good times and good conversations with you. How did this start? How did you start all of this presenting and curating?
So when I trace my kind of history as a presenter, I generally circle it back to being in junior high school and having friends over. My dad is a musician. He's a professional trumpeter. My mom is an amateur musician. She was a pianist. And so music was always around. And starting probably around fourth or fifth grade, I became sort of a music junkie. And by the time I got to junior high school, so much of my life was kind of having friends over and pulling out records and like, oh, you need to listen to this, and oh, no, you need to listen to this. The track isn't even done, and I'm pulling out the next record. And that, I think, continued on through high school. Then when I went to university, during the orientation week, I joined two extracurriculars. I joined the radio station and I joined the concert committee at my school. And I think it was really from there that I found my calling. I grew up playing music myself. I played also trumpet and valve trombone and baritone, and I sang in rock bands and things like that. But it was really, I think, once I got to college working in the concert series that I realized that my calling was really to support people who are much more talented than I am and to give people a platform. And that was a way for me to sort of continue that sense of sharing my passion, which on my social media bios, I sort of joke about as imposing my taste on friends and strangers since 19 whatever. But essentially that's what I've made my career, is to take the art that I'm passionate about, and then I have a platform where I can share it with other people. And it's really about that moment of exchange and about the sharing of artistic passions for me.
Well, I have no doubt that you're an artist. You may not play the trumpet professionally, but there is 100% an art to what you do. And, you know, music is an ecosystem and full of people doing different kinds of creative things. So I would imagine this is your Martha Graham. What did she say? Everyone has, Liz is the dancer in the room, but, everyone has something unique and singular, and that's why we're here to offer that. So.
Yeah, and I think, for me especially, it was around 2000, 2001. I had a brief foray where I was at Symphony Space in New York, and I curated a 12-hour tribute to Miles Davis, wall to wall, which was their signature event. And I put together about, I think it was about 34 different segments, each about 20 minutes long. That was really a portrait of Miles Davis through my own eyes. And I think that was the event. done lots of programming before that. I was at Central Park Summer Stage before that. I programmed festivals and so on. But I think it was in the wall-to-wall Miles Davis where I realized that my own artistic expression as a curator could really come to the fore, and that my art is sort of the collection and the juxtaposition of a lot of other people's kind of individual art. Around that same time, I also started DJing more regularly. And I think it's the same kind of thing. I'm not necessarily a remixer, I'm much more of a selector, but I think that part of the art form is about how do you create a sort of an emotional arc, a musical arc, sort of a spiritual arc through the artists whose work you put together.
Well, I have two more questions before I pass the mic over. One is you were and maybe still are a lifelong New Yorker, but also moved to Abu Dhabi in 2015. So why did you make that decision? Or, what inspired you to want to take that job? And also, do you have a DJ name? And if so, would you share it with us?
Sure. I'll start with the DJ name because that came first. My DJ name is Acidophilus. And it came because when I was at Symphony Space, I was half-time and I was also freelancing. So I needed a name for my freelance company. I was eating breakfast one morning and I saw on the yogurt label contains acidophilus, live and active cultures. I'm a fan of a bad pun. So I adopted that as both the name of my freelance company. And then when I started DJing, I started using acidophilus. For social media, I use active cultures as my main social media handle. And I think it works. As far as
I wish that yogurt knew how influential it was.
I know, right? Yeah.
When you move over to Abu Dhabi, I'll actually share my screen here because I found this footage that takes us right there, taken by drone. So as a segue into Eleanor's second question.
So this is an interesting video, right? I have the Grand Mosque on my mug right here. So that is the Corniche. That's the Etihad Towers, which you saw in Fast and Furious. They drove a Lamborghini from one building to the other. What you'll see is there are sort of a scattering of these sort of postmodern high rises. This is the Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque, which is spectacularly beautiful. It really is as beautiful as it appears. The lighting for the mosque tracks the cycles of the moon. So this is the Emirates Palace Hotel. That's sunset. So the thing that you'll notice here, which is actually, this is really good, is that Abu Dhabi is an island. It's actually a series of islands. So it's not dissimilar to New York in that way, where there are different islands that are all connected by bridges. They're mostly natural islands. In Dubai, you have some of these man-made palm-shaped islands. Abu Dhabi is a little bit more kind of the natural islands, and they've developed I actually live not too far from that bus terminal, but they've really developed Abu Dhabi in districts. And so you've got main Abu Dhabi Island, which is downtown, which is what you're seeing there. That's the Corniche. And then about 15 minutes out of downtown is a natural island called Saadiyat, which used to not have any bridges to it, really beautiful white sand beaches right on the Gulf that people would day trip to on their boats. There's a big kind of waterfront culture in the UAE. And they designated Saadiyat as a cultural district. About 15 years ago or so, it was identified. And as part of that, they then started investing in bringing partners there. So they built a partnership with New York University. They built a partnership with the Louvre, and now Louvre Abu Dhabi is just down the road from us. They broke ground on the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. There's a Sheikh Zayed National Museum, which was originally developed with the British Museum. They're building a natural history museum. There are also some kind of luxury resorts and a golf club right on the beach. And they will eventually be building a marina district. So what's really interesting is you've got a place that has really been committed to developing arts, culture, and education as part of its future identity. The UAE it built its wealth very much on the oil and gas economy. They're also very well aware that that economy is finite, and so they've been working to really diversify the economy in lots of different ways. And the cultural sector and cultural tourism are areas that they really decided to go kind of full on into. So for me, the attraction was to go to a place where there's not been very much established performing arts culture. There's the Abu Dhabi Festival, which has been going on for about 25 years. There's Abu Dhabi Classics. They're kind of the large hotel that you saw, Emirates Palace, hosts lots of events. There's another place called Cultural Foundation that's reopened. So it's not like I was going into a completely blank canvas, but it was a much more open field with the will on the government level, as well as the institutional partnership of NYU, to really develop the cultural sector and to do it in a new way, which I think as a New Yorker, it's very easy to think that there's kind of no place else that you can live or work, right? And I was very much like the diehard New Yorker that nobody ever thought would ever leave. In New York, when I'm here and don't have COVID, I tend to go out every single night of the week, often 2 events in a night, sometimes 3 events in a night. And so I live in a very New York pace. And what's been exciting in the UAE is learning to adapt, but also be able to sort of mobilize the resource and the will to really develop this sector. And because there aren't that many of us who are working in the cultural space, we also tend to know each other. So, and that's not just in Abu Dhabi, but it's Abu Dhabi and Dubai and Sharjah, which is the emirate just north of Dubai, and even in the Northern Emirates. So there is also this very strong kind of collegial sense of shared mission that people really want to build the arts and culture ecosystem there.
You really are start to plant a new active cultures there, and
Yeah.
they're already mushrooming. I love how you compare these two worlds because they look so different visually, but then you say it's islands like New York. And I heard you in a podcast compare Abu Dhabi to Queens, because you said it's so diverse and it doesn't have a dominant culture. That makes it to you feel a little Queensy. And then you also said it has an LA vibe to it because it's very car based, it's very spread out. And you just said that you had this New Yorker attitude, center of the world, go to shows every night. How do you go to shows and find new artists in Abu Dhabi? Is that even possible? Like, do you pop into your car and just drive somewhere, or is there anything like that where you can go to every night and really discover people?
So the work is different in Abu Dhabi. I think that when I was working as a curator in New York, you're sort of always going to shows, you're always taking an input, and then you're also always working on output. So when I was at Joe's Pub, I was booking 500 shows a year. And so you're constantly in this sort of input-output cycle. Within Abu Dhabi, it's a little bit more separate. Usually when I'm there, I am in presenting mode. I'm more in output mode. I am, of course, going to events that are happening kind of both all around Abu Dhabi and in Dubai. They tend to be more episodic. They tend to be a little bit more festival-based and initiative-based. But also, if an artist is already there performing in the UAE, I also feel like they have a champion, so it's less important. And I've really tried to position the Art Center as a place for discovery. We're commissioning and co-commissioning a lot of work. We're bringing a lot of people who are coming to the UAE for the first time. We're presenting work for the first time if it's a local or regionally based artist. And then I get my input at other times of the year where I'm going to festivals and conferences, places like Womex or the Arts Presenters APAP conference, or things Beirut and Beyond, things like that. So what we do within the Arts Center is we built a residency model. We're bringing artists typically for about a week at a time. There's not a really set touring structure where you play New York one night, Philadelphia the next night, Washington, D.C. the next night. So when we bring somebody, it's a pretty big lift. And so we have them stay for a while and sit down over the course of the week. We will have a dinner party in the artist's honor. I think that sort of connects to, in a certain way, what the social life of the UAE was before these cultural institutions were there. So much of the cultural life took place in people's homes. There's the sort of the Arabic hospitality traditions of welcoming people in and also introducing them to your friends. So we do that to welcome the artist in, bring students, faculty, people from the general public, partially for the visiting artists so that they have a sense of actually who the community is. Life on the road can be pretty anonymous, as probably Eleanor and Dario can attest to. You don't always get to meet the people in the kind of in the community in which you're playing. But also, I think artists are also often sort of very mystifying to people who just see them on the distance of the stage. So these meals become a way for people to break bread and to kind of humanize those relationships.
Fantastic.
So every week starts with
this,
that. Yeah, go ahead.
I think this should be a general rule in the US. Every artist hosted anywhere should get a dinner first. What a fantastic tradition.
Yeah, it's really something that, again, was in part to keep myself from being bored, and in part I didn't know people, so it was a great way to just like, I'm going to host dinner parties almost every week when artists are coming, and this is a way for me to start building my own relationships, collecting friends for the Art Center. And we do a sort of facilitated conversation and introduction where every single person in the room introduces themselves to every other person in the room publicly. It takes about an hour, and it is always really awkward in the beginning and ends up being really warm and personal.
Fantastic.
So we have that. We do workshops because we want to build the skills of the artists who are in our community. We're doing career chats and artist talks. The artists are visiting the university classes at NYU, so they're being integrated into the curriculum, and not just in the arts curriculum, but also when we can get them into an economics class or a first-year writing class or a design class or an engineering class, depending what the topic is, a lot of public policy. We do that, and then we'll do a combination of public performances and invited school performances. So over the course of the week, we have activities probably 4 to 5 nights in a row on a given week. And then there's also just the hosting of an artist in town and helping them to get to discover Abu Dhabi. So I think I've built my life in a way that still feeds my workaholic New York tendencies, but also really takes advantage of this unique opportunity to really spend time with artists who I want to spend time with.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And I think Liz was wondering specifically about how you commission, right, Liz?
Yeah, my question in terms of the creative work. So when you commission an artist for new work, either in Abu Dhabi or when you were programming here, I guess it depends on the situation, but I'm wondering how much influence do you have over what they're presenting? Is your approach more of, hands off, say, here are the resources, here's the space, you do your thing, or is it more of a creative conversation sort of between the two parties?
I think it's a really good question, because commissioning can mean a lot of different things. And we do both commissioning and co-commissioning. And we've commissioned or co-commissioned, I think, about 34 pieces now in our first 7 seasons. So it's a big part of what we do. And I think part of that is there is this sort of cliche about the UAE as being a place that imports culture. And I think that through the commissioning and co-commissioning process, it's really us as a catalyst for new cultural kind of output and knowledge development, which is, I think, in keeping with NYU's identity as both a liberal arts teaching college, but also a research university. And I look at the commissions as artistic research. There are a lot of pieces that we will sort of sign on, commit a certain amount of resources, and then we'll be the regional premier. And that's the primary investment. But there are always projects, depending on the nature of the artist, where I'll be more involved in the creative journey. So, for example, we co-commissioned a piece by filmmaker Sam Green called 32 Sounds, which is the second piece of Sam's that we co-commissioned. The first one was a collaboration with Kronos Quartet, who we've also commissioned a few times. Sam is a filmmaker who deals with film as a performance medium. So he narrates it live. The film is beautifully shot, interviews and set pieces, and then music is performed live. This was a meditation on sound and politics and the philosophy of sound and ephemerality. And he and I started talking about it very early in the process. Oh, look at that. There's Sam. Yeah, and there's J.D. Sampson. Cool. Well done. So Sam and I exchanged a lot of ideas. There are certain subjects for the film that I recommended who ended up being his interview subjects. He had me watch kind of various drafts of the film, and I actually gave notes. And we also, during the pandemic, one of the things that we did is we put together a group of filmmakers, mostly university students, as well as some young filmmakers from the larger community. And once a month, he would have like an open Zoom session where he would share the work that he'd done over the last month, because we really want to open up the process. I think that a lot of the arts that have come to the UAE have been kind of beautiful world-class pieces that are already finished. And so one of the things we're trying to open up is the creative process. And Sam was really generous and willing to do that. So that one was much more collaborative. One of the pieces that we also premiered this year, we were the lead commissioner on, called The Main Circle, by a filmmaker named Philip Rashid, aka Soul Trotter. He had actually come to the piece that Sam Green had done with Kronos Quartet and fell in love with this idea of documentary as a live medium. Philip has a background as a b-boy, kind of grew up breaking, came to the UAE. He's Kurdish, Iraqi, and Bulgarian, grew up in the Netherlands. Again, it's sort of like Queens. There he is. He came to judge b-boy competitions and then decided to stay in the UAE and reinvented himself as a filmmaker. He fell in love with this idea of documentary as a performance form. And so he pitched us on this project that focuses on the underground b-boy, b-girl scene in the UAE, which is artists from all around the region who really come to the UAE as a magnet, as a place for opportunity, as a place for stability, as a place for kind of more free expression. And that we've been guiding over the past 2.5 years, much more actively as a sort of more of a hands-on producer, for example. And they really developed it over several workshops. We were giving notes all throughout, and we're really much more intimately involved. And now we're hoping to help it to tour internationally as well.
And Bill, Eleanor and Dario were just in Mauritania working with local artists, and I heard you talk in an interview about local artists in Abu Dhabi, or local music in the region that you're discovering at the moment. I'll just share a little bit of sound in the background while Eleanor will ask her next question.
My next question is about local artists. I do want to say I have a friend, for example, who just moved to Abu Dhabi from South Africa, who's a bass player. So I know local artist probably has a lot of layers. Who lives there, who's from there, who's working there. So that's sort of an open question. Just what does that even mean, local artist? And then, I would say, is there something that's been surprising to you that you didn't expect to learn about what's happening in Abu Dhabi with culture, in that region with culture, something that, even with your years of experience in presenting, just can be cultural, can be creative, can be in a certain approach, point of view. What took you by surprise, if something?
Wow, there are so many questions in there. I'm curious actually to know who the bassists are. It's very hard to find a bassist.
Rudo.
Oh, of course it's Rudo.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I know Rudo. Yeah, because it's a small town. So
of course it's Rudo.
Yeah, no, and actually Rudo just shot a little documentary for a project that we did with Boom Dewan and Nduduzo Makhatini, South African jazz pianist, and there's another South African drummer living in Abu Dhabi named Claude Cousins, who's going to be coming to New York actually with the Cuban Collegiate Project at Little Island, August 19th to 21. We'll circle back to that, but there's a early commercial. So I guess the first thing to sort of unpack is the word local, which within the UAE context, local is often used as a euphemism for Emirati nationals, Emirati citizens, right? And I think in many places that have a large international community, one of the questions that comes up is, well, who are you presenting the work for? Who's in your audience? Are they locals or are they expats? With the idea that expats is sort of a small portion, but sometimes the lower hanging fruit. In the UAE, the expat population is 85 to 90% of the overall population. So some of those sort of expectations of not local with a capital L being Emirati, but local meaning someone who's based there, 90% of the population are in some way or another, quote unquote, expats, foreigners. Although that also includes people who are born and raised there, which is also something that's really interesting, to be in a place that's got a second generation population whose orientation often goes to their parents' country or their country of their passport, as opposed to the place where they were born and raised. So it's complex within that. And I think one of the things that is exciting about that is that some of the conversations that happen in the US, which have to do with tension around difference, tension around being with people who speak a different language, who practice a different religion, who wear different clothes, who've got different orientations. In the US, in many ways, and in Europe, in many ways, that has been such a fraught area of conflict. Within the UAE, that's the given condition. Like, you expect that if you're in a room of 20 people, they're going to be from 10 or 15 different countries. And so you sort of expect that. And so I think there's an openness that comes with that. There's a curiosity that comes with it. You don't have that same sense of fear. And so for me, this is where I think the sort of the Queen's conversation comes up. As a New Yorker, you're used to thinking you live in an extraordinarily diverse place. But within that, there's still a certain kind of pressure to assimilate, and the question of, like, are you from here? Are you from there? And it plays out in really different ways in the UAE, because the sort of assimilation dynamics are just not the same.
Wow, so fascinating. And we just heard, by the way, in the background, music of pearl divers, which is, I think, an ancient tradition in the region. Was a little experiment to put that under your voice. I hope it was pleasant. And it was just something that you mentioned in a conversation of how you're trying to get underneath, like, this very diverse society you're a part of, and look for the roots from way back when. But let's spend the last part of the hour on the pandemic and the future of your industry. You told us, preparing for today's session, that you, of course, went fully virtual with the Art Center. You created and invented a lot of very interesting and fascinating productions in the virtual. You also used the word expiration date by saying there is a certain expiration date to some of these formats that might have been working in the pandemic, but they don't do as much anymore. So how do you look into the hybrid world of the arts? Like, how can you set up this industry that you're a part of to be sustainable when there's so much uncertainty right now about how things are continuing into the fall, into next year?
Yeah, there's so much around the idea of sustainability. I think that was really brought up during the pandemic. Economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, mental health sustainability. I think there are so many different struggles that we were all facing simultaneously about how do you keep the work going. One of the conversations that's been happening a lot, I think, within the performing arts field is this idea of more sustainable touring models and what they've started to refer to as slow touring. And in a way, that's the model that we started practicing from the beginning, almost out of necessity. But I think that becomes, in part, one of the models that will continue, where rather than getting on a plane every day and going to the next place and going to the next place, which leads to burnout, it's very difficult on the performers. It doesn't really breed a deep connection. And also in the kind of in the context of global health risks, it's also kind of a recipe for transmission. I think slowing down the time that you're in a certain place has actually been an important model. And even, especially as quarantining, was kind of a big part of the requirements just to travel internationally, you had to build in, if you wanted to go, I know somebody just went to Hong Kong, he had to build in a week-long quarantine before he could kind of enter into the space. So I think you're thinking about that. You think about the timeframes. For me, I think it's also, what are the unique characteristics of an online interaction, for example, that turns it into an asset rather than a drawback? It's not a substitute for an in-person experience. It's offering you something that you can't have. So, for example, we commissioned, first we presented a project called Theater for One, We Are Here, which was a one-on-one digital theater project that Octopus Theatricals created with Christine Jones, who's primarily the theater designer. And then we commissioned a second group of plays. And for that project, it's live, it's real time, it's not pre-recorded, so it's got all the characteristics of theater, but the actor is in their own home. They're using a sort of a proprietary platform that is not Zoom. It's point to point, so there's less lag time. It's a little bit more direct. They've adjusted they've created almost a teleprompter that adjusts the screen. So right now I'm looking at the little green dot in the top of my screen. So it looks like I'm looking you in the eyes, but I can't see any of you. Or I can look at you in the eyes and now I'm looking down. The Theater for One is this very magical way of being in the playwright performer's home. In this case, we commissioned 6 playwright performers from Nairobi in Kenya. They wrote original work. We gave them a very basic prompt and then they created their own work. And then one audience member at a time would sit with them for about a 5-minute piece. It's the most concentrated theater experience that you've ever had because your responsibility to be on the other side of the screen is very different from when you're one of 200 people in the dark in an audience. And so for me, there were so many things about that, about getting to know a group of theater makers in a part of the world where I wasn't as familiar with the theater scene, where we created a tri-national team between Nairobi, the UAE, and the US. So we had people working in multiple platforms. It was exceptional. And now it's touring. So we presented it last year in Abu Dhabi, but our audiences could come in from anywhere. Then we presented it in January with the ISPA conference. And then Arts Emerson in Boston is going to be presenting it again in November. And the actors will still be in Nairobi. The tech staff will still be some of our UAE staff. The producing staff will be in Boston and New York. So it's a different kind of model that can only exist, I think, because of this technology. And it had just its own unique characteristic that can connect to an in-person theater experience. And it started with a one-on-one theater booth that Christine had designed, but it became its own thing.
Fascinating.
Another piece we commissioned was a choral piece for headphones that was 360-degree spatialized audio, and it was all assembled, individually recording each member of the chorus, and then the sound designer kind of placing it in space through this program called Spat Revolution. So there was, again, these were explorations that we wouldn't have done if it weren't for the pandemic. And they, I think, allowed us to take some chances artistically and allow the artists to kind of push their own practice forward.
Fascinating. We're also looking to spatial audio right now to bring to our community in the fall on Remote Daily. There's so much happening in audio space, and it's very exciting how you again lead it. The slow touring idea is so fascinating to say an artist can't stay. There's schools that are looking forward to have them. There might be a dinner, there might be a meetup. There's so much more than just a performance where you sort of have this distance that you described that's always there between artists and the audience. And I love your idea of saying hi to everyone in the room before performance, no matter how big the room. So fantastic. So thank you for giving us those examples. But I remember Liz actually looking into the legal background of coming out of the pandemic. And Liz, you as a performer, you're dealing with this every day.
Yeah, something that is I'm a dancer, trained dance artist. And so, I mean, I think these questions for me really are, I'm speaking from perspective of someone who's very much involved in dance world, which is, part of performing arts, obviously. So my question, I think the idea of what constitutes as ethical contracts and equitable pay, working conditions for artists really came to the forefront of the conversation during the pandemic. As personally, many of my friends who were dancing with me, they all had to leave the city because all the jobs went away. So this narrative of artists as frontline workers sort of pushed up against this messaging that many of us grew up with, that you do this for love, not for money, but simultaneously, love can't pay your bills. So from your perspective, it's two questions. So what do you, to you, what makes an ethical contract? And then secondly, how can institutions like NYU or Lincoln Center support artists sustainably and use influence as an institution to set a precedent for equitable treatment across the field as a whole?
Okay. Again, all these very, very big questions.
Mic drop.
Yeah. So I guess to start with is recognition of the power differentials, right? And that in many cases, and I've been lucky enough to primarily work for fairly large institutions, and we've got a different financial threshold for paying than individual artists do. So I think, first of it is an acknowledgement of who's carrying what financial load. Historically, artist contracts, performance contracts are really predicated on the payment being triggered by the final performance. But there's so much labor that's embedded in getting to the final performance, from, of course, all the writing and rehearsals and preparation of whatever the material is, to the development of all the marketing material, to actually even the negotiation of the contract itself, all the pre-production. All of that happens with the payment often really deferred until the show takes place. One of the big questions that has really come up is, for example, should we move out of a language around a deposit, and then the deposit is going against the final payment, and the final payment is for the delivery of the service, which is the show, and actually recognizing that the deposit is not a deposit that should be refundable, that it's a first payment to cover all of the work that sort of led it up to that point. It's the payment that allows you to market the show. It's the payment that actually allows you to prepare the show, whether or not the show happens or not. So I think that is an important shift that's really been happening. There have been institutions that have moved away from deposit, final payment to first payment, second payment, and we've done that ourselves, just as an important way of sort of marking that. And especially state universities, government entities often have this idea of, from a procurement policy, you don't pay until the service is rendered. And so part of it is actually then to define the services that are part of what is delivered to justify the first payment. So I'm seeing a lot of nods from Eleanor right there. I think she's been there. I think it also relates to, again, clauses that we often didn't really look at very closely pre-pandemic, particularly force majeure, and the question of what constitutes force majeure, and if there is a cancellation and a forced cancellation that's outside of your control, then whose responsibility is it to pay? And the question of whether or not those cancellation clauses put undue responsibility on the artist side, whether the kind of what role did the institution play in carrying some of that, and from a relationship standpoint, I think more than anything, it's been trying to get to a place of collective problem solving and moving out of this binary role of often, especially in times of conflict, especially in times of cancellation, the artists and the presenters, or the artists and the agents, end up being pitted against one another. And I think that there's been this very much of a shift to say, all right, we're all struggling. We all have to face this. We all have our own financial pressures. We all have different people we're accountable to. But how can we work together to find an alternative. So from my standpoint, one of the things that we did was, if we had planned to present an artist in person, that was no longer possible. We came up with an online deliverable. We came up with a video concert. We came up with this headphones piece, found some other way to basically say, all right, we are going to treat that as the fulfillment of the contract. It's a different artistic output than we'd originally planned. But this way, we don't have to interrupt the cash flow. We don't have to interrupt the creative process. We're just going to do something different that can work for everybody. For smaller independent presenters who are living and dying on ticket sales, that's not possible in the same way than us who've got the funding of the university behind us. But I think that was a way that it really felt like we were continuing to be generative through the crisis, as opposed to sort of pitting ourselves in opposition to the artists that we work with.
Eleanor, I saw you nodding so much. So I'll leave the last question to you before I ask Bill what to listen to. Eleanor, what would you like to close with?
Oh, thank you, Bill. First, just thank you for being here with us. I know we talked about burnout in our advance call, and here you are recovering from COVID, or hopefully recovering and still with us today. So just thank you for that. And I think, the language that you're introducing in this conversation is so important. And, the word that comes to my mind is like warrior, like cultural warrior. But maybe there's another term that we need to find, because cultural warrior could lead to burnout. And what else do we have to use to honor, your work and your presence here with us today, so you don't have to go now and get back in bed. So thanks, first of all. When you think about the future of the field, and that's a big term, I know, but what would you like to see carried forward creatively, contractually, even a couple of things that you feel like have staying power as we hopefully emerge from this strange time that we've been in?
I think that the sort of the biggest lesson or the biggest skill that got us through this was about sort of open and ongoing communication, and as much transparency as you can. I think we had so many artists from, I think the first artist that we canceled was in around March 5th, 2020. Kid Koala was about to get on the plane to come from Montreal to the UAE to do the story of a mosquito. And we had to start having conversations then about maybe you shouldn't come, this thing is happening, we don't know. And then we had calls, sometimes it felt like every week, sometimes every few weeks, but it's this constant check-in, right? How are you doing? What's the situation there? This is what the situation is here. This is what we know. This is what we don't know. These are what the risks. And we had those conversations for 2 years until we finally ended up bringing him. So I think that sense of collaboration, that sense of openness and communication, and the fact that we're symbiotic, we are working towards the same goals. Our work doesn't exist without the artist's work doesn't exist without people to facilitate the performance. That takes shape in a lot of different ways, but that to me, I think, was the biggest focus, is really trying to get out of a mindset of opposition, trying to get out of a mindset of let me see if I can negotiate the lowest possible fee, to saying like, no, how can we put together deals that work within our budget but treat people fairly for the amount of work that they have to do for the lift that we're asking them for. And it's about that I think that is probably the biggest focus.
Well, may all arts presenters think like you. Really, thank you. And Felix, I think you had you wanted to ask Bill. Yes.
Bill, first of all, tomorrow, we hope that you can be a part of what you created, globalFEST. Link is in the chat for everyone who is in the tri-state area. Bill's co-creation globalFEST joins forces with nightclubs all over New York City, like Drum and Barbès, for an event in Central Park. And there's so much going on tomorrow. Finding music has always been your forte. And I'm just going to share one last piece here that you curated in Abu Dhabi. And maybe leading to this last question, what do you recommend for us to listen to at the moment? What is something that inspires you, where you see the future of music?
Well, this is a really good one. This is related again to the pearl diving music that you're using to underscore. The electric guitarist is Ghazi Al-Malefi. The percussionists in front are from Kuwait. They're this band called Boom Diwan. Claude Cousins is the South African drummer I mentioned, also friends with Rudo. And Boom Diwan and Ghazi will be at Little Island in New York on August 19 to 21 as part of the Cuban Collegiate Project. There is one track on Arturo Farrell's Virtual Birdland album called Anima Shuf that came out of that collaboration. And that actually might be the song, actually, if I'm listening right. So I would recommend that. The artists who are playing globalFEST tomorrow, I recommend all of them. We've got Dacha Bracha from Ukraine, Amal Marcus, Palestinian singer, Kombo Chimpita from Colombia, Amethyst Kia from Tennessee, Rare Essence from DC, one of the legendary go-go bands. We've got Heart of Afghanistan, Ahmad Fanous, who just recently came to the US on asylum from Afghanistan. And then there's a silent disco. So
Wow.
that's what I would start with for today. Tomorrow will be something very different.
I love looking at these drummers here. It's just fascinating. It's captivating. Thank you. This was Remote Daily, the season. We will come back on September 10th with our first ever live show in New York City. Yes, you heard it right. Small live in-person audience on the Lower East Side. Watch out for the announcement. Tickets will be very limited. Community members go first. And I hope to see you all back then. Bill, thank you, and get healthy until tomorrow.
Great. Thank you so much. Good talking to you all.
Bye.
Have a wonderful summer. It's Remote Daily.